I will do now something that I very seldom do. In fact, I think I recall having told this particular story only once, although it may have been more than once, and in fact with consequences of a psychological nature which made me, so to say, pay a price for it. But since I've done it once and I survived that one, I'm quite sure that I'll survive this one too. But in any event, it's very highly personal. But then I am a person and you are persons, so why shouldn't persons communicate to each other? So probably the most peculiar feature of it is that it occurred to me at a very, very early age. So much so that I almost doubted the testimony of my mother when I asked her about how old I was when this happened, because she remembered, and she told me that I was 3 years old. And it was hard to me to imagine then or now that I was capable of such a curious experience at such an early age, but apparently I was, because I remember it like it happened yesterday. All right. So in any event, what this was a dream. And of course, you know, we people who like Carl Jung and people of that sort are also very fond of dreams. In fact, the book that really put Carl Jung on the map, shall we say, in our times, was entitled Memories, Dreams and Reflections. So the issue of the dream was always considered by the people of certain prophetic inclinations as being of considerable importance. Now, I don't claim any prophetic credentials with this, merely on account of something very strange, which, however, had an immense effect on my life. And if you have a very similar experience, you might fare similarly, although I cannot promise. Now, here is the story. We were living, this is fact, this part of it is factual. I was living with my father and my mother. I had no brothers and sisters in what was sometimes northern Hungary, sometimes Czechoslovakia, and now Slovakia, and I don't know what other new country they are going to invent just in order to occupy my ancestral home, you know. But in any event, at that time I think it was Czechoslovakia, which really has absolutely nothing to do with my story, but I thought I mentioned it just the same. In any event, my dream was that an indistinct figure, but human-like, came to me and ushered me to a wall which had a heavy sort of Victorian draperies covering it, but I couldn't see any face on the figure. All I could see were a humanoid figure, somewhat hazy, and two hands. And the two hands came and opened up the drapes that were behind them. And behind them was what appeared to be a large painting or something of that sort, although when I looked at it closer, I saw that it was alive. There was motion in it, so it wasn't purely a static pictorial representation of anything. So there I was looking at this great big frame, and in it a huge scene of a somewhat frightening nature, although I wasn't frightened, wherein there was a landscape with dark waters. I have never seen the ocean at that time in my life because I lived in a landlocked country, no oceans. The nearest ocean down by Fiume, by Trieste and around there on the Adriatic, and that was too far away. In any event, a vast plain of water, of rather darkish waves in the water, and a dark, cloudy sky from whence lightning flashes came forth at fairly great frequency, and in the water stood a strange figure. I was familiar from various books because, this is way, way before the time of television and all things of that sort. I haven't even been to any movie until I was about 10 years old, and we went to Budapest. So it was a scene within which a being who resembled in appearance of sort of what I imagine to be the or a conventional devil, a big ugly creature with horns, and at the same time there were lightning flashes coming from the sky, rain was coming down, and he stood about not quite up to his knees in the water. In his hands, or rather claws, he held a strange object which I first couldn't quite discern, but then I recognized what it was because we had one like it in our house. It was a globe, the globe of the earth, and he held that in his hands with his long fingernails, his claws embedded in the globe, and from the globe there were falling drops which I couldn't quite discern their color. May have been water, may have been tears, may have been blood, but in response to the clawing, so to say, there was definitely some substance flowing forth from the globe, and there, rather triumphantly, and not at all in a friendly fashion, stood this awesome figure, and I, the little boy, looking in at him with some consternation, although I don't believe that I was really afraid, because I was convinced that he was over there and I was over here. He's not going to come out to get me. And so I stood there looking very intently and for a considerable period of time at that picture, and then suddenly the hands which I saw originally came, and they pulled the curtain back in front of the picture, and then there was nothing to look at anymore. And I turned around and went away in some fashion. But it made a big impression on me, although I was a big dreamer and sort of a kooky, visionary kid. I would see all kinds of stuff, whether I was asleep or not. But this one kind of took the cake, if there had been a cake. And it really made a big impression on me. So this was on a Saturday night. A Sunday morning came. We had the priest, who was our occasional chaplain, over for breakfast after Mass, because we had our own chapel, a family chapel in the garden, where at that time we did not have a permanent chaplain, but about a couple of times a month a priest would come and say Mass, and then all of our employees and everybody in in the neighborhood would come to that church service, and then afterwards we had the Reverend Father for breakfast. So, but as I usually did, priest or no priest, even prior to the breakfast, I told my father, my biological father, about the dream, because that was our custom already. In the morning, I don't need to regale you with all the details. In pretty much every morning, I would slither out of my bedroom and through a connecting door go to the big Victorian dining room, and there sat my father drinking his good English tea and smoking Turkish and Egyptian cigarettes, which filled the room with such a wonderful fragrance that I ever since then I had a certain reverence for tobacco, although my own use of it is very moderate. In any event, then I always would greet my father, good morning, and he would ask me, all right, son, what did you dream? So this time he didn't have to ask me because I had a ready story. So I told him the story. Oh, he says, that's really amazing. Come on into the breakfast, you can tell the priest. Well, I said, all right, if I have to, I will. So we went in and we had our breakfast of family and our one guest, myself. So finally I told my story, and the priest, curiously, who I'm sure has heard and seen weirder things than that, because the Hungarians are a strange people. We have strange dreams, we have strange visions, and we generally do strange things whenever possible, you know. So he looked at me, his eyes got big, and he said, oh, no, that is a remarkable dream. And then he turned to my parents and he said, well, you know, the Holy Spirit often shows little children what may be concealed from the rest of us, and this could very well have been of that order. So he just instructed me to pray and to be good, a frequent admonition at my age and my condition, and then we all dispersed, but somehow I never forgot the dream. Now, so I, you know, little as I was, but with access to wise older people like my father and my mother, I tried to make something out of the dream. And finally, sort of, as we say in Latin, viribus unitis, by united strength, we came up with a sort of an explanation. And the explanation being that this was at best ambivalent and at worst evil figure that was holding the earth, the globe upon which we live, in his hands. And obviously thereby denoting a certain ownership or supremacy, and being of a somewhat awesome or a frightening aspect, although I was quite convinced when I saw that this was like a tableau vivant. You know, it moved, and I didn't have to be afraid that the being in it would come out of the frame. So there was no real reason to be afraid. So, however, that image remained in my mind for a long, long time. And a few years later, not very long, because I was pretty precocious and constantly looking into books, and after all, you know, in the 1930s, living in northern Hungary or southern Czechoslovakia, whichever you please, you know, we didn't have much entertainment, and so my father had his gigantic library, my mother had hers, and I was looking forward to assembling mine. But in any event, I was very excited by this image, and from then on I looked up whenever possible, and also in my conversations with my father and others, I looked up what would be possibly information that would have some relevance to this unusual image. And one of the references that I came across was that way back a long time ago, at the time of Jesus Christ and so, there were some strange people in the world who were referred to as Gnostics, with a G. In Hungarian it's just Gnostikus. And that one of their beliefs, or part of their mythos, was that there was a not very pleasant, big spiritual being. Not exactly the devil, because, in Catholic Church it's always the devil. Later on I found out, that's a very optimistic statement, because there is not just one, there are many. And many of them are in human form, and all of them are unpleasant. So in any event, that I was confronted with a spiritual being that in some way has exercises a power over the world within which we live, and consequently the earthly lives that we lead. And Sophia said, all right, Gnostic. I was already writing some and reading, because my father taught me how to read, so I could read the newspaper for him every morning. In any event, that had nothing to do with the newspaper, because the Gnostics had obviously existed a long time before. But in any event, I started looking up references in encyclopedias, in historical books, and if I didn't understand them, that I could always ask my father to interpret it for me, which he readily did. And I came up with the information that these people, called the Gnostics, had a mythological or biblical figure in their spiritual practice and in their literature, who was, owing to the very great popularity of that language in those days, who had a Greek appellation. This is not a personal name, but a description. And that appellation, that description was Demiurgos. Of course, I was many years away from studying Greek yet. I had 8 years of Latin, I had 2 years of Greek, and 2 years of Hebrew by the time I got out of school. But that was all in the future. And so I said, well, and what is that? So the little that I could discover was that there was a sort of, I'm sure that was not, those were not the terms mentioned, but that it was like a counter god, like a very powerful spiritual figure that really stands in opposition to the official good, and who therefore, and for various reasons which I'll tell you in a few minutes, has been referred to as the Demiurgos, which means the half-maker. And the reason for that being that he was believed by the Gnostics to have created about half of creation, which no doubt in itself represents a problem, because which half? In any event, the half-maker. a good friend of mine, the late Jan Sæther, a very famous painter from Norway, who spent some time with us here in Los Angeles and became a great Gnostic student. He always referred to the Demiurge not as the half maker, but as the craftsman who executes a certain part of something. It's maybe not the plan, not the whole thing, but the craftsman. All right, so I thought, well, I guess I dreamt of the craftsman, and he was pretty doggone ugly and all that, but I was a curious Hungarian. I wanted to find out more about that craftsman. And so from then on, I had almost like an inbuilt plan to look wherever I could, where there was some possible information available. I would look for more insight into this figure and try to see what strange being did I dream about. And I adhered to that promise that I made to myself very religiously, and year after year after year after I grew up, and I was still very fond of books, our own and others, I found out more and more. Until the time came when I was about 16 years old, just a year or so before I left my native land because of the manner in which it was occupied by the Russian and the Soviet influences. Right around that time, in my school, I had a religion class, which that year was on the subject of what is technically called apologetics, which apologetics is how to defend the faith, where little did the authors knew that the reader there would become a real heretic later on and probably would not defend the faith, namely me, but I read, and there was a nice little chapter there on Gnostics. And it also mentioned that there was a sort of deific figure that, however, was not good, that had a lot to do with running this world, according to the Gnostics, and said, yeah, that's the one whom I saw in my dream. But of course I remembered every word from that particular text that in that school book that I was reading, and with that much intense desire to find out something on a particular subject, I would say that information comes to you. And it sure did come to me too. Until at age 16, 17, when I left my country and I ended up for about a year in the fair land of Belgium, there I even encountered some people who said, well, we are still Gnostics. They weren't all left there in the 2nd century, and very interesting people with whom I then had a great deal of exchange then and by correspondence later on. In any event, this was the beginning of my, how should I put it, almost obsessive search for the Gnostics. And if you look for something, as I indicated before, with that much energy, then you're going to find things. And I sure did, on and on, until I became practically what would pass as a Gnostic missionary in the United States. When I came here, I arrived right around New Year's of '53, having left Europe on the famous troop transport ship General C.H. Muir, of which my friend has recently found a photograph. When I arrived in America, I was already intensely interested in these mysterious people who had some kind of a connection with this rather frightening figure that came to me in my dream. All right. Now, going on from there, we need to maybe sort of review a little bit of what the information was that came to me. And it indicated that back in the 2nd and 3rd century, the Gnostics had an explanation, you might say, for the imperfections and evils of this world, which was of a theological or mythological nature, and which included in a very important position, this figure of the Demiurge. Now, in order to locate this figure, because as I have probably convinced quite a few of you over the years, those who were here, that I consider myths and mythology to be of tremendous importance, and I was very fond of people like the late Joseph Campbell, whom I revered not like a demiurge, but like a demigod, let us say, and others, and thereby I absorbed a very great interest in this field. So let me now reconstruct from some of the literature that was found over a period not only of years but of centuries, some of the mythologems regarding this figure, and then we might wish to take a little look at what meaning we may derive therefrom, because matters of spiritual nature, teachings of a spiritual nature, and including the myths of the world of people who were seeking for greater spiritual knowledge, these things are truly fascinating, especially in the sense that their study and their internalization by way of study does bring us some of that curious commodity that is referred to as meaning. Now, we need to keep in mind in that regard that when we are talking about meaning, we are talking here about spiritual meaning. Jung would call it psychospiritual meaning, but it is meaning nevertheless, but not the kind of meaning where this means that. That kind of meaning was always obnoxious to me, for which reason I was very, very bad in mathematics, because how can 5 plus 5 end up with another figure that is a 1 and a 0? It doesn't make any sense. Mathematics and subsequently algebra and all of these things never made any sense to me. But on the other hand, literature, religion, mythology, poetry, art, these were the things that always appealed to me. And as I now looking back these many years, as I think I can say with some degree of assurance, that they appealed to me because in them was, to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the situation, an element of that anciently practiced but always alive commodity experience of Gnosis, a kind of knowing which conveys not primarily or even even accidentally, external data, but rather internal connections. Internal connections which enhance your consciousness, which when you read them and study them, when you absorb them into your nature, all of a sudden make you feel different from the way you felt before. And in this case, unlike so many other things in life, that different is not something troublesome, but rather something that is enlivening. So a little bit of meaning gained by such means, really makes you feel good. I can't express it any other way. If you want to have a life with as much good sentiment, as much good feeling as possible, then try to seek spiritual meaning, conscious meaning, meaning in consciousness, because that will bestow it on you. And moreover, the kind of meaning that it is likely to bestow is one that you are not going to lose. So that after I have been with some of these people who were Gnostic students and Gnostic scholars in Belgium, elsewhere also in Austria, with their instruction and the literature that they supplied me in several languages, I had ways of really feeling good without getting into trouble, like most teenagers, So let us say that was the beginning. But as it should be, a beginning needs to have its continuation. It needs to continue. And then, of course, as time went on, especially when you are that intense in your search, then, as I mentioned before, if you are looking that hard, you're going to find something. And I sure as heck did. Because wherever I went, I found more and more, and then I found people like the teachers and writers at that time of the Theosophical Society, people who were attached to the teachings of Madame Blavatsky and of others, and these people all knew something about Gnosis. They all had... Well, first of all, they themselves were putting forth a meaningful worldview, which in turn had a close relationship to the early Gnostics, and which, believe it or not, included the symbolic and mythological figure of the Demiurgos, as he is called in Greek, and which therefore related very directly to the dream that gave me that much insight, and that became such an important wellspring, really, of my life. Now, in order to place this experience and its possible explanation into some kind of meaningful context, I have to beg your pardon, because I have done some of this before. After all, it works its way into all of my studies, of trying to present in a brief but hopefully meaningful manner what could be called the Gnostic world picture, something that in German, which is my second language, I was bilingual as a kid, was called Weltanschauung. I think Max Heindel, the noted spiritual teacher whose beautiful building still stands, I think, in Oceanside, California. I think Max Heindel's big book, his chef-d'oeuvre, his most important work, was a book called of the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception. And I think that word cosmoconception is a pretty good translation from the German as a Weltanschauung. In any event, of this worldview. Incidentally, and we are engaged in that in various ways, pretty soon, unless the Grinch will come and steal it at Christmas time again, we have our little book club in which we study these matters in a more informal way, perhaps, but whichever approach we take, the image that reveals itself and that was put forth in a modernized fashion in the latter part of the 19th century by Madame Blavatsky and the various other 19th century occultists, and that was espoused and magnificently put forth both in writing and verbally by our late and greatly revered fellow Californian, at least most of his adult life, Manly Palmer Hall, and various other people. And so what I am now trying to kind of sketch to you is the cosmo-conception of the esoteric tradition as it descended from people like the Gnostics, also some others, who were involved with that line of thinking and action in olden times, and who were, let's say, whose influence was subsequently diminished by people who didn't understand them. And you got to be careful, people who don't understand you, because you know what happens? It makes them mad. It makes them angry that they don't understand you, because the implication is there. Maybe they don't understand you because they're more stupid than I am, and somehow people never take to that appellation with a great deal of enthusiasm. No matter how stupid people really are, but they hardly ever like being called stupid, or even think of themselves in that fashion. Everybody thinks of himself as very smart, even though not too many other people may share that view. And this is just part of human life. But in any event, let's say you find this in the books of Theosophy, Rosicrucianism, Neoplatonism, and various branches of the esoteric tradition, and it has this much in common, that long ago and out of time and out of mind, something strange happened. Of course, strange things happen now too, but they are of a different nature and a more unpleasant nature. And this something was that a totally transcendent, totally deific, totally wise and marvelous spiritual being decided to come forth from its transcendental hiding place and to pour its essence forth into space and thereby bring into existence a manifest cosmos. And this being, by the Gnostics in their Greek, was usually called the pleroma, which in Greek means the fullness. And the principal reason for that word, for that appellation being that this ultimate existence is full of life, is full of being, it's full of creativity. It is filled with incredible, magnificent and everlasting potential. And so this mysterious being, which in Madame Blavatsky's secret doctrine, for instance, is referred to as the eternal parent, and has a sort of an androgynous appellation because of that. Neither the mother nor the father. Although the ancient Gnostics managed to even revamp the then new Christian theology according to it a little bit, because they said, well, there are three aspects of this great being, and one of them we call the Father, the other one we call the Mother, and that subsequently became the Holy Spirit. You know, there are icons in Christendom, this particular one in Western Christendom, where the Holy Trinity is depicted, and there are many of those. We had a great big one in our chapel, and you know that's the one that got me into trouble with the pigeons, because there was the Holy Trinity on a great big painting, and it had Jesus Christ with the cross, it had a paternal figure with a great big beard, and above them was what I thought was a pigeon. Of course, it was the dove symbol of the Holy Spirit. But I know that thereafter I was very gingerly with pigeons, of whom we had a great many pigeons and doves, and you know, I had a little what do they call them, an air-driven rifle, a little rifle. By the time I was about 7. By the time I was 10, I had a very good French Flaubert rifle. You know, we were sort of like Hungarian Texans. You know, we like to have shooting irons around, although we certainly were told very clearly how to be careful with them, and we never had an accident, never had anybody even wounded, but in our household in any event. But let us say so then I was afraid to even attempt to shoot toward the pigeon, because I might kill the Holy Ghost, or as we called him at that particular time. It didn't occur to me that probably the Holy Spirit may just look like a bird, but would not be mortal. But in any event, so there was the Father principle, the Spirit principle, and the Son principle. So that is a trinity of creativity way up in the beginnings already. And like I mentioned, Madame Blavatsky in her secret doctrine, which has as its, I don't know what to call it really, it's sort of the spiritual mythological backbone of that huge book. Is an ancient poem which comes from an obscure Tibetan Buddhist communion. The present Dalai Lama, His Holiness Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama, had read Blavatsky's book, and he said that it is a genuine Tibetan scripture. We know that scripture. Not too many people in Tibet even knew about it. But a little cigarette-smoking, chain-smoking Russian lady, she knew about it, you know. Interesting. It doesn't mean that you are going to know a lot just because you smoke cigarettes. Now you start smoking cigars, you might do better. It just depends. But in any event, the poem starts with the eternal parent wrapped in her there she is called female, wrapped in her ever invisible robes, had slumbered once again for 7 eternities. And then the eternal parent wakes up, and then there is a forthcoming from the invisible region into regions of diminishing invisibility and increasing materiality. So if you want to kind of get an image, I can suggest one to you, but that's sort of my image. That doesn't mean it would make much sense to you. I have a sort of pyramid-like image where the beginning of the manifestation of life and spirit and everything is way up at the top, and then it pours forth in this pyramidical forth further and further and further down, although then finally the pyramid reaches the earth, and then it has two polarities, one of the totally transcendental spiritual matter and one of the totally material physical matter. And then all kinds of stuff, if you don't mind me using that term, all kinds of stuff in between. I mean, it's a real pleroma, a real fullness. It is full of spirit, it is full of creativity, it is full of wisdom and marvel and beauty and excitement. If you just manage to touch it once, if you get as far as having put your finger at some part of it, you will never forget that. And you will also undergo important creative change at the same time. What kind of, well, sort of the kind of things that Carl Jung referred to as individuation. You will become the more you are acquainted with this incredible psycho-spiritual structure, the more you are acquainted with it, the more wisdom you have, the happier you are, and all of this can be summed up that you are traveling within a world of incredible meaning that has transcendental roots, but that extends into everything. The kind of meaning that is the greatest miracle of consciousness. In order to have that kind of meaning, that's why we have a consciousness. You think we have a consciousness in order to invent gadgets and then take pictures with our telephone and all of these things? I mean, those are byproducts. And most of them are, at least in my sort of non-mechanical mind, rather inconsequential byproducts. You know, I could live very well, and I have lived for quite a long time because I just had my 92nd birthday. So I lived for quite a while without computers and without all of this folderol that is going on nowadays. And you know what? You can live very nicely without those things if you put your mind to it. Now, of course, I don't deny that you could probably live quite nicely with it too, and you can get especially information, but I liked it when I could walk into a beautiful library. There is one that I'm thinking of that was sort of my ideal library, although there are many, and that is the library of St. Peter's Monastery, a Benedictine monastery in Salzburg in Austria. It's the most beautiful and most inspiring place where I have been. First of all, it is all carved and decorated in Baroque art. Beautiful golden figures of angels and saints and heroes and people, all and behind them one shelf after the other of this gorgeously bound, wonderfully illustrated and exceedingly interesting books. You know what? I prefer that to all the clink, 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 getting information from a mechanical electronic device. But at the same time, I know that it's quite useful in various ways, and as long as I don't have too much to do with it, I am quite happy. But in any event, the days when we went to libraries to do research, and not to a keyboard, I think those were nice days. And I kind of wish that they would be reconstituted and come back. In any way, now I'm going really afield, but let us say there is therefore this gigantic psycho-spiritual structure of reality. And in that structure, everything is in there. That's why it's called the fullness. And now, now then, we need to keep in mind how do we, with our round globe that nasty fellow was holding there and so forth, how do we fit into that? Well, judging how unhappy so many people are, judging by how they kill each other at the slightest inducement, even in the Holy Land where, if you read a little bit of history, the sacrifices that people made to go to the Holy Land from so many different countries was immense. People really knocked themselves out to get to that spot of land over there between the river and the sea that people are yelling about nowadays. And for a while they held out. Eventually they had to leave. But many families had their... take Madame Blavatsky's family, whose name was... they were Baltic Germans before they were brought by Peter the Great to Russia. Peter the Great did that because Peter the Great didn't think very highly of the intelligence of his own people. He said, if I don't bring people here who are smarter than the Russians, then we're never going to get anywhere. I am just channeling Peter the Great now, and it's great. But in any event, Madame Blavatsky's family's name is von, which is a nobilary knighthood title, von Hahn, H-A-H-N. A Hahn is a German name for a rooster, that kind. And her ancestor, the first knight Hahn, was at the crusade, as many people were at that time. And he was awakened, as one can easily do when there are such creatures around. He was awakened by a rooster. It was still dark and all of that, so he couldn't sleep anymore. He got up and he walked around, and he looked outside of the camp, and there were the Saracens. Nowadays they call them Palestinians, if indeed they are the same. Probably not. Anyway, the Saracens were creeping up on the camp. So he sounded the alarm, got all the knights together, and they fought the invader off so that they survived in the camp. But if it hadn't been for the rooster, they wouldn't have been able to do it. And therefore, he received the title of von Hahn, and the knight from the rooster. And to this day, the Hahn family bears the coat of arms of the rooster, and I am happy to say, because this is the kind of thing that I never cease repeating, that a first cousin of mine, very beautiful Hungarian girl she was when I knew her, had married one of the rooster people, and a Russian, exiled Russian gentleman she married him in Europe, although she lived earlier in Canada. And so, let's say, these various unusual features are present, whether it's roosters or not. But the rooster has been regarded symbolically in mythological symbolism and so forth as the awakener, the chanticleer. And then I'll say something else about another roots. I mean, in any event, what can happen is that as one gets in touch with this incredible structure within which we live and move and have our being, this cosmic structure, one learns, one awakens, one acquires a certain kind of knowledge and gnosis, and this gnosis, which is just Greek for a certain kind of knowledge, this gnosis in turn has very good effects in the people who have. I've known people who, and I certainly don't place myself in some special position there, but let us say I've known people who, in my estimation, have a little bitty gnosis, little bit of transcendental knowledge. You know what? They were nicer and smarter and more commendable people than anybody around, just with that little bit. Yeah? If that is possible, by gum, then I think more of us should see if we can do something of that sort, because there is such a thing. And of course, in modern terms, some of the great psychologists, like Carl Jung, they managed to express this truth by saying that, look, what happens is that your consciousness changes. Your consciousness is infused with something really wonderful, which then opens up various other doors. So if you can, seek that sort of thing. Try to unify yourself. Don't be at war with yourself, as we often are. Right away. You wake up in the morning and the war starts. Why? Well, in various ways, it could be the people that you surrounded yourself with, but other than that, it's the kind of thing now. Should I have breakfast? And if I do, am I going to put on a few more pounds? And all this, the strife. And then we are amazed that people out in Jerusalem or something like that are fighting with each other. Every one of us is fighting within himself or herself, unless we fight the fight. We have to control that fight. So that is really our great difficulty. People think, oh, well, sin has come into the world because of talking snakes and because of sex. Well, I don't really think so. I've been around a lot of snakes and they never talk to me. And as far as sex is concerned, we won't talk about that. But let us say, when consciousness takes certain leaps, quantum leaps or whatever you want to call them, with it comes meaning, with it comes beauty, with it comes the appreciation of the inner and the outer life of our species and others as well. But now I got to jump to our subject, because otherwise we're either going to be here all night, that is those who don't leave, and I don't know none of you will do that, or various other issues, that that being the case, that we and everything else and everybody else come out of that fabulous structure of the fullness. And we come further and further into outer manifestation, eventually in the physical manifestation, although we never lose, no matter how much physical embodiment we may experience, we never lose our contact with what C.G. Jung very wisely called our essence. There is an essence that came from the beginning and that is still not only with us but in us. And that essence is the instrumentality of our enlightenment, of our salvation, of our spiritual development. But that being the case, that's the good news, as far as I can see. But you know doggone well that that there are also bad news, and these bad news are that somehow, with so many of the good things that we experience in this lifetime, with it there also comes a dark side. There comes a side that, to say the least, is disturbing and can make you feel unhappy and bad. So, all right, so we thank the divine for our life. And indeed, as the Jewish theology particularly states, the gift of life is the great gift of God. We all have to be grateful for being alive, but because if we weren't alive, then how could we have other experiences? How could we become conscious? How come any of these good things could happen to us? So it's all postulated on life. But you know and I know, and sometimes we know more of it than other times. Please have a seat. Yeah, you know and I know that there comes a time, sometimes too early, sometimes real late, when that life goes away. So that we receive a life that gives us energy, that gives us the ability to function in this curious world, and then there it goes. Why should that be? Why, as Madame Blavatsky expressed it poetically in one of her writings, let's see, how did she put it? Under every beautiful flower lies coiled a deadly serpent. Now, that's not a very optimistic statement, but on the other hand, if it warned you to stay away from what's underneath the flower, then maybe it saved your life, huh? Sure as heck. That's when, in the days when I was young and I was able to walk around in the hills here and so forth, I stepped over many a rattlesnake, but I was very careful to step over them and not too close to them. So because you have to be alert in this world. But in any event, let us say, to translate that poetic phrase of Madame Blavatsky, connected with everything that we like, connected with everything that is good and true and beautiful and exciting, there is something of a contrary nature. There is a shadow. It's sort of as if the universe, or whatever you want to call it, the Demiurge, with one hand, he gives you something. With the other hand, he takes something. And there's just, you know and I know, there's not a darn thing we can do about it. We just have to say, well, okay, that's the way things are, and that's it. And so I'm here today and gone tomorrow, as Criswell, the television prophet, used to say. So let's say there is something peculiar. It's a beautiful world, I don't deny it, and some parts of it are more beautiful than others. But it's also behind that beauty and along with that beauty, there are a lot of terrible, a lot of unpleasant, a lot of mournful things. It's there. Whatever stands in the light of the sun casts a shadow. That is why Carl Jung used the term shadow for a particular psychological component. In fact, there is, in the Middle Ages, when there were a lot of, in the Middle Ages, some of the Middle Ages, people really lived a fairy tale life. And it wasn't always a pleasant fairy tale either. But let's see, one of them was that the only being who sometimes moves around here in the world who doesn't cast a shadow, who do you think is that, according to the medieval folk belief? The devil. The devil doesn't have a shadow. And I always wonder, why shouldn't Uncle Nick have a shadow? Well, because he is the shadow. So that maybe explains it a little bit. That's why that famous medieval German poem, Peter Schlemihl, the Mann ohne Schatten. Peter Schlemihl, the man who was a Schlemihl, maybe, the man without a shadow. Because Peter was walking around and he met the devil. And the devil said, "Come on, Peter, I'll buy you a shadow." He said, "But then what will I do?" "Well, you don't have to worry. Nobody's going to ask you where your shadow is. Come on." So they made a deal. The devil walked away with Peter's shadow. But then that led to all kinds of difficult situations because various people, particularly people with some qualities of seership, something or the other, would see that, hey, Peter doesn't have a shadow, what's with you? So finally Peter Schlemihl became very unhappy, and he went and finally found the devil, and he said, "I pay you back everything that you paid me and then some, just give me back my shadow. I can't live without my shadow." So, whether we look at it psychologically or otherwise, as long as there is light, there has to be a shadow. But why? Why are all these strange dualities here? Life that ends in death, love that so often ends in cold hatred. Look at all the divorces. Look at all the things. Even parenting. The children are raised by people who don't know what they are doing and who cause various difficult conditions to arise in the child life. For which reason, as I often remember, as by both, obviously by now both of my parents are gone, that those of us who had good parents, who did good things for us and looked after us, and saw to it that we grow up into more or less decent persons, that they should receive our gratitude and our prayers as long as possible. Because without them, where are you? And these are matters that unfortunately sometimes society does not take cognizance of. Where does a good society start? Starts in the home, starts with the father and the mother and the children, and I don't know, maybe some cousins who drop in at Thanksgiving. So these things are very important. But the fact of the matter is that there is something, I don't know whether this occurs to you, and hopefully not very often, because it's a somewhat depressing thought, that there is so much contrariness, so much that is conducive to unhappiness and various other unpleasant conditions in the world. And if we are not very careful, then these things get to us. Why should that be? Why is there light and shadow? Why is there good and bad? Why are these opposites so powerful? And they're everywhere. They jump out at us. You don't have to be an alchemist, who are really people whom I love, to realize that these opposites are here, and they really make life more stressful and difficult for us. Why should that be? You know, even in the animal kingdom, even in all the various creatures that are around. I know a Jewish gentleman. I don't know. I don't know him. I listen to him on the radio. Dennis Prager, very very intelligent man, and he knows more theology than a basket full of rabbis. You know, and Dennis often says, you know, and he writes commentaries on the Torah, and they are really quite interesting. And but Dennis Prager, one of his sayings is, the one thing that he's been trying to figure out as to why God created the mosquito. Why God created the mosquito. And he hasn't. If Dennis hasn't figured it out, I'm surely I won't be able to figure it out. But let's say there are a lot of circumstances and beings, visible and invisible, around, where you really wonder why do we have to have these sort of critters around? And there is no real answer to it unless we contemplate the answer of the Gnostics. And now I might even come around to the main subject of my, the announced subject of my talk, because the Gnostics said that when it came to creation, at least of our particular physical world, something happened. An influence, a force, a consciousness, a being somehow got into the mix. And with that, what he did with the mix, he mixed it up. So that there is there was a great deal of good and beautiful and elevating and inspiring imagery and force in the world. There is also its opposite. And the Gnostics said, yes. Why? Because in the great descent of all the spiritual forces from above, something happened. And what happened was that a consciousness, a force, a being entered our physical world, which is neither all wise, nor all good, nor all beautiful. But it's here, and it is intensely and intimately involved in the way the world is run. So if you wonder why the world is run so strangely, why there is always some mess, there is another war, there is another pestilence, there is another stupid politician, and so forth. There is always something there. Why? Because somehow an unpleasant influence has entered this structure. Now, this doesn't mean that we have to be subservient to it. It doesn't mean that we should go around with the wailing wall and cry about that there is all of this unpleasant stuff in the world. Because if we know what we are doing, we have the wherewithal to cope with it. Now you might say, how are you going to cope with death? Well, you're going to cope with death by dying. In other words, sometimes by experiencing these strange and to us unpleasant things, we have a way of getting by them and overcoming them. I refer to that because there have been some significant deaths that we experienced in my family and in our community recently. But at the same, so we need to remember that no matter how exciting, no matter how beautiful, and no matter how joyous at times our world is, it is not always such. There is light and shadow, there is good and bad, there is pleasant and unpleasant. And the Gnostics said the reason for that is that a contrary influence has somehow entered into creation. That something is wrong with creation. You know, same way even the Judeo-Christian Bible, or the Quran for that matter, and things like that, they all contain material that indicates a kind of a shadow at the time of creation. That not everything was okay in the Garden of Paradise, of course not. Otherwise, we would have stayed there. But in any event, there is something got into the mix that has made it, let's say, at least at times, pretty doggone unpleasant, and that is conducive not to wisdom but to stupidity, not to kindness and goodness but to cruelty and things of that sort. And these things are here. And you don't have to be a priest or you don't have to be a psychiatrist to realize that it is here. Now, that is, so the Gnostics said, the presence of the Demiurge. And as always, the Gnostics have a mythological explanation for things. Why? Because there are a lot of the really profound things in this life can only be explained mythologically. People think they can explain them scientifically. Well, don't hold your breath, because very few things have rational explanations. But there is something happened. And if we know about this something that happened, and if we then learn how to work our way with it and around it, then we are much, much better off. Now, let me tell you very, very quickly in a few words the mythology. You find it in the book Pistis Sophia, translated by the great theosophist G.R.S. Mead, who was the last personal secretary of Madame Blavatsky. In any event, there it's described. There was this the wise feminine spirit of the transcendental world, Sophia, because that's the Greek word for wisdom. Well, she underwent some difficult things in her career. She went forth from her original habitat in the Aeons and then had to go here. She had a bad time for a while, as we all do. But when she was in a particular place, in her agony of unhappiness, she bore an offspring, and this offspring became Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge. And then she said, I don't know whether she used that expression or not, but she said, now what are we going to do? You know? And the only thing that she managed to do was, well, we'll have to create a world for him. This is not a very pleasant fellow. He knows how to do a lot of things. He knows how to be very powerful, but he is not really altogether a good person. So what we did is, what she did was, she helped him create a world. And you guessed it, it is the world wherein we live. Now what the conclusions mythologically to be drawn from that are several, and they are not all bad. One of them is that wisdom, the lady wisdom, she is the one who appears in all the wisdom literature of the Bible, the book of the wisdom of Solomon, and Ecclesiastes and Ecclesiasticus, and all of those good things where she says, I've been here from the beginning. I was there. I was there with the Father before the world was created. Wisdom. But let's say she had a hand in bringing forth this unpleasant fellow, who then, with her energy, created this world. So that's the myth, how this all started. But the myth also has some positive implications. And one of these is that since the mother of the demiurge, of the villain, was wisdom, you can get to him with wisdom. And so what we need to cultivate in this life is Sophia, the wisdom, whether as a person or in other ways. And with this, when we are able to reach out for the transcendental wisdom, then we are able to push the shadow, the darkness, the unpleasantness of this world aside. Now, we may not be able to put an end to it entirely, but we may reduce its effect on our consciousness. And this is really all that matters. Look, I've been and you've been in places where during the war, I went through the World War II in 1944 and 45 as a 13-year-old civilian. And let me tell you, that was not a pleasant period of my life. So there are terrible things that go on. But if we have something there, some kind of a contact with wisdom, and fortunately, I would say, and I certainly don't want to, I already did one highly personal disclosure today, I'm not going to do another one, but let us say I had contact with that sort of thing. How you can get out of a very, very dangerous and bad situation by wisdom, by Gnosis, and by the mythology of wisdom. And that is why the Orthodox and the Catholics have the Blessed Virgin Mary. She is a manifestation of Sophia, like the Gnostic Sophia, and that is what we were all doing. We wore out a few rosaries in those days, but we had contact with somebody to whom the rosary was addressed. And we received the strength, we received the wisdom to get through terrible, terrible dangers and difficulties. And I have never forgotten that. I know that can happen. And this is really the contention of the Gnosis. Look, you are here in this world, and there is a lot of trouble in this world. There are some really good things, but also some. And for you to get through to the bad stuff, so to say, and for you to really grow spiritually toward the greatness. I have all the quotations here, but I'm not going to refer to them tonight. From Madame Blavatsky, from Carl Jung and others, all of these people said, if you do the right thing, if you discover your essence and then hang on to it. Hang on to it for dear life, because it is dear life. That essence will save you. That essence will take you out of, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it, as the Lord Christ said. But you have to do something. You have to find the highest, the most benign, the most wise portion of yourself. That seed of wisdom that has been planted into you, the myth would say, by Our Lady Sophia herself. Or we might guess the Virgin Mary, they're all the same. Listen, if it just as a little observation of somebody who has studied history much of his life, like myself, if it weren't for the mythic figure of the Blessed Virgin Mary, this world would be in a much world shape than it is. The saving grace of Christendom is the Virgin Mary's figure. Now you say, what? Some little Jewish girl who bore somebody on amid the sheep and things like that? No. We are dealing with something else. An extremely important mythic figure, a deific figure that is able to bring you enlightened consciousness, that can bring you close to Gnosis. That is what we are talking about. And that is so. That is one aspect in Christendom, but elsewhere. But you have it on the different other feminine figures. The feminine wisdom, whatever form and expression it takes, the feminine wisdom is the manner whereby we can deal with and ultimately defeat the demiurgic influence. We can become conscious. We can become one. Which is Jung's individuation. In German, individuum means an indivisible unity. We have to become an indivisible unity constellated around our essence. And then none of the false creations, none of the evils of the demiurge can get to us. And if there are enough of us who can do that, and if there are enough of us who can become one, and one with the principle of wisdom, then we have Gnosis, then we have the real knowledge. It's not the knowledge of details, but it is a knowingness, to know that which you have been seeking all your life, which you have been looking for all your life, whether you knew it or not. The one thing that the few wise people whom you may have had contacted was trying to teach you. The one thing that a Manly Palmer Hall could bring to us who knew him, and many others, the one great thing, wisdom. And this wisdom, I'm sorry to have to repeat myself, and again, obviously you don't have to accept it, you don't have to accept it. This wisdom has a feminine tone. It is the great mother of the universe, and the great mother of the demiurge too, because she couldn't help it at a particular time. But let us say we can have contact with a principle of transcendental wisdom, and Carl Jung called it the transcendent function. That's a very scientific way of putting it. It's a function, right? Okay. Well, whatever you want to call it, if I have the ability to touch transcendence and to be thereby transformed and transfigured and increase in that and be in touch with my essence, so to say, then you know what? Nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. And when we don't have that, then everything matters. So if you have these times in your life, and must confess I still have them even at the age of 92, where just nothing looks right, nothing feels right, and we are down because of various things that are happening and so forth. Then remember, scrape away the outer shell. Wash off the dirt of the world that has accumulated on you, and there will be the shining force of your essence. And that essence will see you through everything. It will see you through life. It will see you through death. It will see you through good people. It will see you through bad people. It will console you when you need consolation. When, for instance, which are experiences that we all have, you have some people, one or more, whom you're very fond of, and then something happens. Either they don't want to have anything to do with you anymore, and there's some kind of a divorce. You know what? And that's the kind of thing that you can carry around like a great big monkey for the rest of your life. All these things, and death. But there's something that is always there. No matter how people may have mistreated you, no matter how nature may have mistreated you, no matter what pestilence and illness comes upon you, no matter what kills your physical body, your essence is there. It doesn't disappear, it doesn't go away. It is the most real thing in your experience. So look for it a little, experience it a little more, invoke it, evoke it, and then all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Now we still will have times when we are down, when some of our beloved people die, we will still feel a sense of mourning, all kinds of things like that. But what we are really about, what is really us, what we have come to discover into this strange demiurgic world, in spite of demiurges and their kith and kin, that wonderful thing is there. And when you discover it, when it comes closer and closer to your physical life, then you have everything. That is the ultimate treasure, that is the Holy Grail, that is what it is all about. If somebody tells you it's about something else, he either doesn't know what he's saying or he's lying. Because there's something here that is utterly and completely real. It is so real, it can't be more real. And it is inside of you. You belong to it, and it belongs to you. And once you have had a little touch of it, once a little bit of that light has come to you, then be faithful to that mystery that has come to you from the utmost heights of the fullness, and that is still with you, and that will take you back to the utmost heights of the fullness again, because it is what some of the wise and holy people have called the Christ in you, the hope of glory, the God within. All this, it's there. But it needs attention. It needs remembering. It needs a continued effort to chase the shadows away. And as the shadows go away, the light comes. May that day and evening and night come soon. May it come right away. May it come to all of you and as I pray for it with all my heart and have most of my life for you and for me, that is the fulfillment of life. That is the life of life. That is the light of light. And it is here. It needs to be discovered to a greater degree, and its living presence within us vivified. I really can't think of anything more important, more valuable, and ultimately more inspiring to conclude with than that. And then, yes, the false gods will be around, but the real God, the aletheia theos, as the Greeks called it, the true God, will be there. The true God will conquer all the false gods and bring us unto itself. What greater, what more joyous, what more marvelous, what more enlightening future can we envision? And it's not only to be envisioned, but it can happen. May it happen to us soon, and God bless you all.